What's up, everybody? Welcome back to J Nix Does Magic and Stuff. I am your host, J Nix, and today on this video we are going to go over some things to get you ready for your pre-release, whether it's your first or your 50th. I'm going to have some tips and tricks for you, and looking at Aetherdrift, some cards that I think can be pretty beneficial depending on your card pool and what you're trying to go with. We'll be looking at a couple sets of cards. First off, it's going to be graveyard and cycling type of recursion, reanimator type of coolness. We'll see how that works. And then we're going to look into some artifacts and see some good possible enablers for making a decent artifact deck. Because as we know, Avishkar, Kaladesh, all that loves their inventions, loves their artifacts. So there is a lot of value to be had there. Then on top of that, we are going to hit up our removal and then good stuff. But before we jump into that, I have a couple slides that I want to kind of run over real quick with everybody as, you know, reminders and just a little bit of information if this is your first time diving into a pre-release. Keep in mind, my card recommendations, they might also do pretty well in the draft aspect of the set. So if you're going to do a Friday Night Magic draft, this might also be helpful for you. So let's get into it. So on my first slide that I have right over here, you see that Aetherdrift pre-release in the title, and then 4 words underneath it. So those 4 words are things that I like to bring to the Aetherdrift pre-release and just pre-releases in general that can be forgotten. And so first off, there's not always necessarily a ton of time in between your matches. So make sure you bring snacks, talking food and drink that you can just dive into whenever you want to. Also, you can buy stuff at the card shop, but bringing some of my own, you know, I know there's going to be something that I like and a good drink that I like. So bringing your own snacks. Second up, bring some sleeves, because despite the fact that majority of your cards might be worth nothing, you might have some decent cards in there. So I at least like bringing penny sleeves to sleeve up my deck, and on top of that, it makes it way easier to shuffle too. So don't forget your sleeves. Now, going into dice, every single set has counters or some sort of way to keep track of something, right? I always bring a handful of dice because you never know when you're going to need dice. You don't know if your deck is going to utilize counters. Also, throw a dice on top of your deck when you have a trigger that needs to hit at upkeep or end step or something like that. It's not illegal. It gives you a good reminder. When you go, you look at your deck and you go, there's something I'm forgetting. And that helps out. So, dice. And then, finally, bring some confidence. That's really it. Whether it's your first or your 50th, you just want to bring some confidence and just come in and be excited and ready to play. Now, this doesn't mean acting like you own the card shop or like you're going to win the whole frickin' thing, but you know, have a little bit of a conversation with people. And people at card shops, at least all the ones that I've gone to, are always willing to help out if you have any questions like that. So, going into our next slide, talking about some mechanics that we have within Aetherdrift. So, first off is crew. Now, the crew ability, you can activate at instant speed. You can crew a vehicle, like I said, at instant speed, but it will have summoning sickness if it came in that turn because it becomes a creature. So it still sees that it has summoning sickness. Now, a vehicle that might say, you know, tap for 1 mana or something like that, you can go ahead and activate that as an artifact. But once you crew it, it's a creature. We can't do that anymore. We can't attack. Only thing we can do is block. That's usually what you see the first time that a vehicle comes down. Somebody crews it up when they're being attacked and they block. Second thing, new mechanic, start your engines. So start your engines is a state based tracking ability. Think of the ring, like when the ring tempts you, right? You don't need a card that says start your engines on the field at all times to increment up to 4, but once you play your first one, you get your first counter for your start your engines. You deal combat damage, say that turn, or 3 more times. You make your way all the way up to number 4. And a little sub mechanic in here is max speed. So once you get to 4 on start your engines, you are at max speed, and there's some cards that will give you specific perks once you hit max speed. So be sure to keep an eye out for cards that say max speed, and some of them don't do anything until they're in your graveyard. So that is our start your engine mechanic that is new. So now we have Saddle. Saddle is kind of similar to Crew. It's not instant speed. Saddle creatures can attack without being saddled. You just normally get an additional perk if you do saddle them. Whether that is a token that comes down, additional attack and defense, keep that in mind. So Saddle and Crew are different. They have different timings and different ways that they can affect the board state. Like I said, Saddle, sorcery speed, Crew, instant speed, and Saddle is going to be tied to a creature, so you don't need to worry about, well, I need to do this before I crew it and it becomes a creature and then I can't use the ability and all that stuff. Yeah, let's just keep it simple. So final thing that I want to go over is Exhaust. So Exhaust is another new ability in Aetherdrift, right? And what Exhaust essentially does is it is one activated mana cost ability, usually, that your creatures might have, that you can trigger, that you can only trigger once per the life of that card while it's on the battlefield, right? And it'll give you certain perks. Now, in the cards we're going to go over today, there are a couple cards that do have the Exhaust ability amongst all these other abilities that we've talked about here. So you'll see a couple good examples about that. Now, if the card leaves the battlefield, say it goes to the graveyard and then comes back, or it's flickered, so leaves the battlefield, it's exiled, comes back in, you can reuse that Exhaust ability. It is a different version of the card itself, so you can reuse it on that specific creature that you have there. Okay, now the last thing that I want to talk about is just a little bit of the mechanics on pre-release. So your deck has to be 40 card minimum, and usually when you're looking at that, you're looking at about 15 to 17 lands. So you're looking 23 to 25 non-land cards. So all the cards that you open up out of your packs, you're going to look 23 to 25 cards. Now, if you have more lands, you're more likely to clearly draw lands. But if you feel like your deck doesn't need as many lands, you can cater it and change it as you need. Now, also keep in mind, this isn't like a pro tour or something like that, where in between rounds, if you want to change your deck, you can change your deck and put in cards that you didn't have quote unquote sideboarded, and you can alter your deck to try a couple different things and see how that feels with your pool of cards that you have. And there's no need to go back when you start up a new round, so you're good there. And then keep in mind, play versus draw. If somebody says, are you on the play? Or you roll dice and you're like, I'm going to play, that means you're going first. It means when you go to play first, you're not going to end up drawing a card. If you're on the draw, opposite. You're going second, you get to draw first, right? So those are all of my tips, tricks, talking over mechanics, going into Aetherdrift as a pre-release coming up this weekend, or looking at it draft from here on out after that. Now we are going to dive into the cycling and graveyard style deck that I think could be very strong in this pre-release and in this draft. Now, keep in mind, yes, it depends on what cards you pull and what you are ending up being able to build out of the cards that you pull. But this is a good, I guess, reminder on what cards are in there and the type of synergies that you can have. So first up, let's talk about the Magmakin Artillerist. So this buys into your graveyard deck, right? Whenever you discard one or more cards, this creature deals that much damage to each opponent. It has cycling on it, and when you cycle this card, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So you end up dealing damage every time you discard a card, whether it's, you have too big of a maximum hand size, you need to discard a card, which rarely happens. And if there's, cycling going into effect, doesn't matter. Whenever you discard a card, it deals that much damage to each opponent. Okay? So, pretty good card. Buys right into that. Gives free damage that knocks in. Perfect. Alright, this is what we're looking for when we're trying to get cards in our bin. We want to put them in the graveyard, but we want to get something out of it. This is going to give us that damage that we need. Next card, Wreckage Wickerfolk. So, bare minimum, it's flying. It can get over top. It's going to do damage for you. But this creature has Surveil too. The great thing about Surveil, it doesn't go back to the bottom of your library. It goes into your graveyard. So now, if you decide to put any number of the cards that you look at on that Surveil 2 into your graveyard, you're just building up that graveyard more and more and more for you. Next, Pothole Mole. Alright? You start off, you mill 3 cards, and then you return a land card from your graveyard to your hand. So if you end up getting stuck on lands a little bit, maybe you started with 3 or 2 and only drew 1, you play Pothole Mole, you are going to mill 3 cards off the top of your deck. Get a land, hopefully out of your graveyard or out of those 3, which are already technically in your graveyard. You can play that land. You're not missing a land drop. It gets you there, and it gets more cards in the bin. This is very, very important if you're going to be running a graveyard deck like this. Alright? Also, Pothole Mole, just kind of a good stuff card across the board, but it's especially good in these graveyard decks. So, Thunderhead Gunner. This guy, a little more pricey, but it's more of a hefty creature. We have reach, and then you can just discard any card out of your hand, draw a card. Activate only as a sorcery and only once each turn. Whew. This just allows you to basically cycle cards that don't even have cycling. It's a great card. Perfect for this deck that we're looking to build. Now, Push the Limit. This is where you get a little bit of payoff. This is kind of your finisher type of thing. Return all mount and vehicle cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. Great. We're looking to close out the game though before that. Vehicles you control become artifact creatures until the end of turn. Creatures you control gain haste until the end of turn. At 7 mana total, yes, it's going to be an expensive card, but this is the card you play when you go, I can win this thing. Alright, so here is one of our first finishers of the set. There you go. Pull things out of your bin that maybe you put in there from Pothole Mole or your Surveil or whatever, and now you can benefit off of that. It's great. It's going to be amazing if you get it. And it's an uncommon, which is kind of sick. Next one, Grim Bauble. It's 1, and first off, it's a small removal, right? When it enters, target creature and an opponent controls gets -2/-2 until the end of turn. Can knock something down that maybe is big that initially they would block with, or it can take out something that's an annoying 2 toughness type of creature. But in addition to that, you can sacrifice this artifact, Surveil 2. Once again, throw 2 things, maybe 1 thing, maybe you decide none. Maybe they're really good on the top of your deck, into your graveyard, and you benefit. Next card, Broadheart Engine. At the beginning of your upkeep, Surveil. So this is a consistent thing that you can start building that graveyard with. This is going to be an awesome card for these graveyard decks if you end up pulling it and you're going that green-black, right? Then sacrifice this artifact, return target creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Great. Pull something out of the bin. That's awesome. That's exactly what we want to do. Fill up our graveyard, use our graveyard as our hand. Next card, Wretch Doll. So 1 tap, Surveil 1. We talked about Surveil. It's just going to be great. And it's 1 and a black to get it onto the battlefield. So I think this is going to be another one of those overlooked but key cards in that graveyard deck that you might look to build. Now, Ooze Patrol. Here's another finisher for you. It's a cheap finisher too. So despite it being 3 and a green, I think you're going to want to play this a little later in the game unless you need somebody on the field. So when this creature enters, mill 2 cards. Then put a +1/+1 counter on this creature for each artifact and or creature card in your graveyard. Wow, that's a great card. Imagine dumping all of these cards with our Surveil and our mill and all these different effects into the bin, playing an Ooze Patrol that has 5 counters on it. 6, 7, 8 counters maybe? Next card, we got a vehicle, I believe our first vehicle here, the Carrying Cruiser. When this vehicle enters, mill 2 cards, love a good mill, then return a creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to your hand. Great, it's doing exactly what we want. 4/3, you fill up your graveyard and you bring something back to your hand. Incredible value. Now, Cole Stoke Gearhulk. So this guy, basically what I put him in here for is he's a 5/4, he's a big body, but he does have that mana value 4 or less reanimator for your creature cards, right? And then it puts a finality counter on it, and then that creature gains menace, death touch, and haste. And at the beginning of your next end step, exile that creature. Put stuff in the bin. Maybe we accidentally pitch away one of our good cards, right? You can get it back with this guy. Next card, Molt Tender. This is just going to be kind of working on that engine for you, right? So green, tap, mill a card. Great. Put a card in the bin. And then you can exile a card from your graveyard and create more mana off of it. So we fill up that graveyard, then we use all those things. Marauding Mako. We kind of talked about this previous, but whenever you discard 1 or more cards, put that many +1/+1 counters on this creature. Fantastic. All right, we end up doing cycling effects. We end up using that card that says discard a card and then draw a card. This one in the right discard synergy deck, not necessarily a full graveyard or full mill deck. This card goes crazy for sure. On top of that, we have the Oil Deep Gearhulk. So you can pick target player. So what you could do is you could pick your own hand, put something that's a little expensive that you don't want, but you think you're going to be able to reanimate back later in your graveyard, and that counts as discarding a card, and then you get to draw a card. So it's like a way to help yourself cycle on creatures or cards in general that may not have cycle. Helps build up that graveyard and helps you close out games ultimately. But you can also choose to put it on your opponent. Now, Zahur, Glory's Past. So this guy gives us the starter engines that we talked about previously. And then in addition to that, you can sacrifice a creature and Surveil. Now you can only activate it once per turn, but Surveil in general, building up that graveyard. That's what we've been talking about. And then at max speed, when a creature you control dies, which he can sacrifice creatures, you create a 2/2 zombie token. A little bit of activating that surveil within himself too. So great card. I think this is possibly the only card with white that we talked about, but great. And then finally, Avishkar Raceway. So I was a little bit more medium on this card when I initially did my live stream, but I think with the cards that we have in the set now fully revealed, this works a lot better, especially at max speed, and especially if you can play this on turn 1. Alright, so next up, I want to talk about our artifacts real quick. So, looking at artifacts, we have Memory Guardian. First off, affinity for artifacts. Costs less for each artifact you control. Great. Now, keep in mind he's an artifact too, and he's flying, so he gets over top. Now, next card, Guidelight Synergist. Artifact, Artificer, Flying, gains +1/+0 for each artifact you control. Great. Next one, Voyaging Quick Welder. Artifact creature. Artifacts you cast cost 1 less to cast. Yeah, great. That helps out us getting more artifacts out to buy into our affinity even quicker. So Broadcast Rambler. This guy, when the vehicle enters, it creates a 1/1 colorless Thopter token with flying. And it's a crew 1 5/4. So that's great, just the bare minimum itself, but it also creates an artifact flyer for us. Pumps up that artifact engine. Awesome. Nimble Thopterist. It's an old school card, I believe from the Kaladesh set, but it was great then, it'll be great now. Creates, once again, another Thopter for us, another artifact, another thing to get in over top. Then Demonic Junker. This guy, affinity for artifacts, like we talked about previously, and when this vehicle enters, for each player, destroy up to 1 target creature that player controls. If a creature you controlled was destroyed this way, put 2 +1/+1 counters on this vehicle. So this is really good because you can use like a servo or a Thopter as the thing that you sacrifice, and then all of a sudden this thing is a 6/5, and maybe you only paid 2 or 3 for it, and you can crew it for 2, which is super cheap. Another great card for a token artifacty deck like this. Then next up, Salvation Engine. Other artifact creatures you control get +2/+2. Whenever this vehicle attacks, return up to 1 target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if you have a little bit of a cycling synergy in there maybe, or one of your good artifacts that you were looking to keep around ended up dying, this is a great way to end up getting them out. Gastel Thrill Roller. Trample Haste. When this artifact enters, it becomes an artifact creature until the end of turn. Sweet. We can swing and get in instantly. It counts as that artifact for us. And then also, discard a card, return this card from the graveyard to the battlefield. Great. Another way just to get another artifact back on the field for us when we need it the most. Thopter Fabricator. Flying. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 Thopter. Awesome. If we can find a way to create a little draw engine for us throughout the game, this card is insane. It's just going to keep creating Thopters each turn for us that maybe we sacrifice, maybe we fly over top and just hit. Mendicant Court Guidelight. So his power is equal to the number of artifacts you control. Amazing. Start your engines. Great. Max speed. If you cast an artifact spell, you may pay 1. If you do, copy it. You can get double the artifacts. That's so good. That's so good. So I'm excited to see where this guy kind of fits in. Maybe I'm rating him a little too high, but for 2, it seems pretty good. Seems pretty good. And then finally, Duretti, Rocketeer Engineer. His power is equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control. And when he enters or attacks, choose target artifact in your graveyard. You may sacrifice an artifact, and if you do, return that chosen card to the battlefield. Another great way to just reanimate stuff that maybe you lost, or maybe you ended up having to bin for one reason or another, to the battlefield. And then that's also going to help Duretti increase his power for us, hopefully. All right, next up, we are diving into removal real quick. Plow Through, great card. You end up creating a fight mechanic, or you can destroy a vehicle. Spin Out, a little bit more expensive. Destroy target creature or vehicle. Still great. Broken Wings, 2 and a green, a little more expensive, but destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. This I've seen work more times than not. It's going to be a good card, especially in this set. Sky Crash, 1 and a red, destroy target artifact, also has cycling on it. Run Over, 1 and a green. This spell costs 1 less to cast if it targets a mount or vehicle you control, so it might just cost green. And then target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature and opponent controls. Keep in mind, this isn't a fight mechanic. This is your target creature's power just is dealt to that opponent creature. Gallant Strike, 1 and a white, destroy target creature, toughness 4 or greater, cycling. This card is going to help out white a lot. Spectral Interference, so 1 and a blue and counter target artifact or creature spell unless its controller pays 4. Now, I think this is going to be a lot better than most people are going to give it credit for. Diversion Unit, I think, is great because you just have a threat on board, right? So 1 in a blue, and then when it's on the battlefield, blue, sacrifice this creature, counter target instant or sorcery spell unless its controller pays 3. Hellish Sideswipe, it's 1 swamp. As an additional cost, you sacrifice an artifact or creature, destroy creature or vehicle. If the sacrificed permanent was a vehicle, draw a card. Really good. For 1, you lose 1 of your things, but you destroy 1 of their things and have potential to draw a card. All right, now let's dive in quick into the good stuff. I got a handful of things I want to run through. Migrating Ketradon. This guy is really good because he's going to end up giving you 4 life. Also has the cycle ability if it's just not working for you, and has reach to stop some of those flyers that we've been seeing come across the screen. It's also a 6/6, so you can kind of use it as a finisher and beat up your opponents right there. Next one, Hazard of the Dunes. This card is pretty interesting because I've seen the exhaust ability, despite it being expensive, actually be mildly within range, but it also has trample and reach. So that exhaust ability is going to turn it into a 7/7, instantly becomes a big time finisher or something your opponents need to respond to. Risky Shortcut. This is cool because each player loses 2 life. I'm okay losing 2 life if I can draw 2 cards. Next one, Stall Out. This is a good way to kind of slow down your opponent when they have that big creature that you're like, oh, I need to find a way to deal with this, but I can't right now. And it also has cycling, so you tap target creature or vehicle and put 3 stun counters on it. Ovayaya Automech Artisan. This card I am actually really interested to see play out in Commander, but I think in a limited aspect and like pre-release you can do big things with this. So each creature that's attacking one of your opponents has trample, so give your big things trample. That's great. And then you can cheat out a creature or vehicle from your hand onto the battlefield, and if it was an artifact, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Next one, Point the Way. This is a little bit of a way to get your basic lands out. Now yes, you do need to hopefully be at max speed so you can get 4 lands out. So for 4 costs, you sacrifice this enchantment, search your library for up to X basic lands, where X is your speed at the time. Now Maximum Overdrive put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains Death Touch and indestructible until the end of turn. The Debris Beetle got Trample, and when this vehicle enters, each opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3. It's a 6/6 for 4, crew 2. You're going to see this in a lot of decks, and you're probably going to lose to it a couple times too. Next one, the Speed Demon. So flying trample, start your engines, and then at the beginning of your end step, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is your speed. This is going to be one of those where you're, lack of a better term, you're in a race with your opponent. So you know that you can only last maybe 2 or 3 more turns with the Speed Demon out, hitting your life at your end step, but you're hoping you can draw into what you need and just completely close out the game. Also, flying trample 5/5, Gas Guzzler, Ben Stiller. So we have start your engines here. It enters tapped, but at max speed, 1, sacrifice another creature or vehicle, and you draw a card. Spike Shell Harrier. There we go. When this vehicle enters, return target creature or vehicle an opponent controls to its hand. If that opponent's speed is greater than each other player's speed, reduce it by 1. I think this is a good way to keep your opponents off of achieving max speed. Bestow Greatness. This is going to be an awesome combat trick. So target creature gets +4/+4 and gains trample until the end of turn. Yes, you can put this on something that's blocked, but you could also put it on something that isn't blocked and just really take full advantage of that +4/+4. Great card, great combat trick. I'm gonna hate it. Possession Engine. When this vehicle enters, gain control of target creature and opponent controls for as long as you control this vehicle. That creature can't attack and can't block as long as you control this vehicle. So it crews, which is great, but you can also use any abilities that it has on it. March of the World Ooze. Great card. I know people are nervous about playing it in their pre-release decks, but I think if you get to 6 mana, especially with 3 forests, this guy, wrong side, this guy, he's going to be the guy that you want. So gives all your creatures 6 power, 6 toughness, and their ooze in addition to their other types. And then when an opponent casts a spell, if it's not their turn, you create a 3/3 elephant that becomes a 6/6 ooze. Autarch Mammoth. So when this creature enters and whenever it attacks while saddled, you create a 3/3 elephant. Another closer for the game. Another great card. Full Throttle. After this main phase, there are 2 additional combat phases. At the beginning of each combat, this turn, untap all creatures that attack this turn. Draconautics Engineer. So this one is really interesting because of its exhaustibility. A mountain. Other creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. Put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. That's going to be good if you have a nice turn where you kind of dump out your hand and you get a bunch of creatures or vehicles on to the battlefield. You crew up those vehicles, now they all have haste, and then this guy gets 1 bigger. In addition to that, you can create a 4/4 red dinosaur dragon with flying as the second exhaust ability for 3 and a red. Venom Sac Ligak. This guy has Death Touch. Whenever the creature attacks while saddled, it gets +0/+3 until end of turn. So it becomes a 2/4. This could be pretty interesting because people are going to want to block it, so they're going to try and throw something in front of it to chump block it. Then Sabsuin Luxa Embodied. Reach, trample, indestructible, and can't attack or block unless it has an even number of counters on it. 0 counters is even, as it says. At the beginning of your first main phase, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then if it has an odd number of counters on it, draw 2 cards. Either way, I think this is going to work out really well for you, and it's going to gain you card advantage when you're on an odd number of counters. Now this guy is very deceiving, because for 5 you can have a trample 8/8. But if you cycle him and use him as a combat trick, when you cycle this card, put 2 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target creature or vehicle. It gains trample and indestructible until the end of turn. So it gets around destroy effects, it gives it trample so it can run over things, and it gives +2 +1/+1 counters. So it gets bigger, so you can try and make sure it runs over things or clears out blockers. Great card. I think I almost like it better for the cycle ability than anything else. Pyrewood Gearhulk. Vigilance, Menace. When this creature enters, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain Vigilance and Menace until the end of turn, and damage can't be prevented. This is going to be big because it's going to beef up all of your creatures, give them Vigilance, give them Menace, and it's a 7/7, so it's kind of a closer on its own. Rocketeer Boost Buggy. I actually love this card, and I want to point out something on this card too. Whenever this vehicle attacks, you create a treasure token. Great, you have a treasure engine now. But its exhaust ability you want to use as soon as possible, which is a little different than most other exhaust abilities I feel like in this set. This vehicle becomes an artifact creature. Put a +1/+1 counter on it. So it is always an artifact creature, and you get a +1/+1 counter on it, so it becomes a 4/3. If I pull it, I'm playing it, I can tell you that. Loot the Pathfinder, everybody's favorite little squirrel, rodent, rat, munchkin thing, whatever he is. So double strike, vigilance, haste, yeah, great. For green and a 1, you have 3 mana of any one color. That's huge in pre-release, limited, those type of things. Then blue and tap, draw 3 cards, massive. We love drawing 2 cards from that god. Drawing 3 for only 1 is going to be way better. And then it's just a lightning bolt for red and tap. Now, Moraganda Raceway. Good old Soul Ring at max speed. That's going to be huge. That gets you another land ahead of your opponents. Great card. Definitely play it if you get it. Then Amonkhet Raceway. So this gives a target creature haste. Cool. You're probably only playing maybe 1 creature or so a turn. This works perfect, and you don't have to pay into it. So just tap, hey, this creature has haste, it's coming for your face. What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. Don't forget, whether you liked or disliked what you heard in this video you just watched, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on the video on YouTube. I am going to be doing some live streams every Saturday, if possible, on YouTube and Twitch. There will also be recordings that are released throughout the week, so keep an eye out for both of those things. And once again, thank you so much